Hello, I'm Faisal Hussain and welcome to 100 Stories Deep. Today I'm reading from Don't Panic, I'm Islamic. This is a number of different short stories written by different people about being Muslim or from a Muslim background. The reason that I'm reading from these is that in the times that we live in, which are unprecedented times for a number of reasons, there are fundamentally lots of stories to do with hope and humour, regardless of the racism and injustice that some of us have to endure during these times. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. My first story is The Joys of Applying for a US Visa by Karl Sharro. The first idea was for a Muslim travel ban, but that didn't work. Then it became a ban on certain Muslim majority countries, but that wasn't workable either. Then it mutated into a ban on travelling with laptops and iPads. It was as if the Trump administration was thinking, we can't stop them coming here, but at least we will deprive them of the pleasure of choosing their own entertainment on the flight. What's next? Travel pillows are denied and straitjackets enforced. America's security, it seems, relies on causing maximum discomfort to travellers from the Middle East. As anyone who has ever attempted to obtain a US visa will know, the process is so absurd and the odds of success so low that back in the 1980s a man from my hometown in Lebanon became an instant celebrity when he managed to get his hands on one. For the next 5 years, which is the standard validity of an American visa, the man acquired a mythical status. People would gather around him in the cafe as he retold the story of how he got the visa. He would pause to take a sip from his Coca-Cola, which he never had to pay for, and recount his heroic tale. Years later, people would still refer to him as the man with the American visa. And yet, here we are, Trump tweeted, "Our country needs strong borders and extreme vetting now." Extreme vetting now. I and millions of others scratched our collective Middle Eastern head. The vetting can get more extreme? Naturally, this was an ominous view and very ominous news. Millions could lose the ability to travel to the US for work, study, visiting family, or God forbid, tourism. Allow me to give you a glimpse into the process, which I have pieced together from my own experience and from the man with the American visa's tales. First, you must fill out the application forms. Many, many questions designed to weed out the absent-minded terrorist, the careless smuggler, or the sloppy illegal immigrant who would fail to answer simple questions and give themselves away. Have you ever been involved in, or do you seek to engage in, money laundering? Do you seek to engage in espionage, sabotage, export control violations, or any other illegal activity while in the United States? Have you ever ordered, incited, committed, assisted or otherwise participated in genocide? When answering these questions, it is important to resist the temptation to express your views about US foreign policy. Like, what about the shady characters the US deals with, who would fail to answer these questions in the negative? Or, what about the US's own engagement in espionage, sabotage and clandestine operations in the Middle East? In fact, it's best to avoid any kind of elaborate commentary at all, and simply reply, no. Except to question 27, which asks if you have ever eaten falafel. That's a trick question. Composure must be kept at all times. When you finish filling out the forms, you will need to pay hundreds of dollars in application fees for the honour of being interrogated in person by officials at a US embassy. Don't balk at the required sum. The US visa is the gold standard of visas and is worth every penny. It's like buying an expensive bottle of wine to impress your friends. Then you need to assemble a large collection of documents to support your application. These will include details of your financial records, property deeds, pay slips, bank statements, tax receipts, criminal records, letters from your employers, airline tickets, hotel reservations, and your grandparents' love letters. Now, the latter is not strictly required, but be prepared because you never know which topics will come up in the interview. Oh, and original documents only. Photocopies are not accepted. You would have liked to show them the documents on your laptop or iPad, but you aren't sure whether the electronics ban extends to embassies too. You will be grateful. After all, to that long-lost aunt who kept old laundrette receipts in cardboard boxes under the floorboards, because they might come in handy one day. What foresight. And now for the fun part, the interview. You were given an appointment at 7 in the morning, which means you will be seen at any time between 7 and 5 in the afternoon. You sit there among the aspiring masses as the hours pass slowly, afraid to go to the toilet in case your number comes up. A human drama unfolds as people are called up one by one, leaving with despair, dejection, sorrow, or quite infrequently, elation. Those are the lucky few, the chosen ones. They are patted on the back jealously by the others as they leave hurriedly, perhaps worrying that the embassy officials might change their minds and revoke their visas instantly. A gold glow and star-spangled halo already glitters in their wake as they hurry home to throw parties to celebrate, where friends, neighbours and the son of the man who used to run the bakery where your mum's neighbour bought her bread will visit to congratulate them. Or perhaps you're just hysterical at this stage. The interview is the high point of the process and requires you to be at your sharpest mentally, nimbly avoiding the verbal traps and the highly trained embassy official will set up for you. Try to get tips from the people who have already been interviewed. They will give you instant reviews of the different officials. Number 5 is tough, who will ask a lot of questions about your finances. Number 3 hasn't approved a single visa today. Number 4 looks like it's my cousin's dog. And then your number comes up. You realise that you've been sweating despite the Arctic air conditioning because there's a bit of dandruff on the lapel of your starchy suit jacket, which is only wheeled out for funerals and these kinds of special occasions. And you're paranoid that the applications officer might mistake it for cocaine. Although the voice of reason, baffled and impressed by the current unfolding events, points out that being a cocaine addict is probably preferable to being a terrorist, so maybe you should encourage this impression. Should I frown and risk upsetting number 2, or smile and make him think I'm hiding something? At this stage, your brain is at near melting point as it tries to negotiate its way through these impossible paradoxes. Thankfully, the blank-faced official speaks. What do you do? Straight to it. No, hello, how are you doing, or how can I help you today? Visa officials dispense with all the courtesies and social conventions of the outside world to establish the power balance instantly. Which feels odd, because this is the most intimate encounter you'll ever have with a stranger, short of a blind date. Over the next 20 minutes or so, you will reveal the most personal details to this person you've never seen before in your life. What do you do? I'm an architect. How much do you earn? Gee, don't you want to buy me a glass of wine before asking that? 1,500. That's not much. Too bad, I thought we were hitting it off, you and I. I should ask for a raise. Any tips? He examines me briefly with a stone-faced expression, and to my disappointment doesn't offer any. Are you happy at your work? Yes, I love my work. At least I don't have to speed date people then deny them entry into the US for a living. Do you have a car? A 1990 VW Golf. Where do you live? Ras, Beirut. Do you own the place? No, I rent. When is it my turn to ask the questions? I have a few good ones. Do you own any property? I inherited an orchard. Where and when were your grandparents born? Sometime somewhere in the Ottoman Empire. The birth certificates? I don't have them. Why not? Well, the Ottoman Empire doesn't exist anymore. It's not like I can just pop into its consulate. Are you trying to be funny? No, sir. Why are you planning to visit the United States? To see my friends. Judgmental look, as if he doesn't believe that I have any friends. Why? Why? Yes, why? The conversation is clearly taking on a philosophical dimension. Do I need to explain the concept of friendship to him? Is it important to avoid being snarky and remain as earnest as possible? For US officials are easily threatened by sarcasm. I haven't seen them for a long time and I thought I could visit New York. I hear it's an amazing city. The official fails to reveal his own thoughts about New York, despite my own eagerness. He changes direction suddenly. Bank statements? It's that one. you only have $200 in your bank account. All right, no need to criticise my finances. I have to justify my spending habits to you now. I was invited to a lot of weddings this summer. He looks unconvinced. Do you have any relatives in the United States? Well, there is my mother's second cousin, but we don't talk to them. Do they still qualify as relatives? Should I come clean and explain the situation? What if he asks about the reasons for the family feud? I mean, not even my grandmother remembers that. And what if I say no and they have supercomputers that know that we are related and he's trying to trick me? This is the insidious nature of the visa interview process. It forces you to confront aspects of your life you have never ever thought about. It digs deep into the fibre of your being, asking historical questions, querying family relationships, inquiring about your finances, assessing your character. You need to have prepared answers for all these questions, and yet answer them casually, nonchalantly, off the cuff. You do this all the time. You are a citizen of the world. The best way to succeed is to approach it as if you were preparing to play yourself in a black and white movie about your own life. A somewhat two-dimensional character that would appeal to the US Embassy officials. You are not a real person anymore. The usual rules do not apply here. You are a statistic, and your stamp on the world, all you have achieved, has climaxed here, in this 12 by 12 foot cubicle, in a neat pile of dead great-aunt's laundrette receipts. Sorry about that, battery died. And so you see, when I first heard that Trump was planning on making it even more difficult for us to travel to the US, I was stunned. What questions would they be asking now? Do you know anyone who goes by the name Mohammed? How about Mohammed? Is this a hipster beard or a religious statement? Does watching Homeland make you angry? What was President Trump's golf score this weekend? Perhaps it's finally time to start searching for my grandparents' Ottoman birth certificates after all. So that is the end of my first story. The second story I'm going to read from, the second short story, is called My Own People by Negin Farsad. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. Muslims don't necessarily have the greatest icons here in the United States. The ones we do have are on the crap spectrum. That's the end of the spectrum that's loaded with bigotry, essentialising, infantilising, and theologocentrism. And dog poo. Oh yes, I did just casually use the word theologocentrism, like it was no big deal. Dropping $10 words has the subtextual weight of saying, I read a book once. Pretentious $10-ness aside, here's the deal with theologocentrism. Scholars have had a tendency to explain all observable phenomena in all majority Muslim countries by saying basically, they're like that because Islam. In some major corners of academia, Islam is a catch-all for anything a researcher doesn't understand. Excuse me. Of course it's not limited to academia. The world of infotainment has also grabbed a hold of Islam to explain things they can't fully comprehend. By which I mean everything. It's easier to say post-9/11 terrorism exists because Islam, than it is to say post-9/11 terrorism exists because the Western response to that act of terrorism has been addled by inconsistent policy processes that focus more on war than on nation building. And those shortcomings have in turn created an environment in which anti-Western sentiment might thrive. See, that shit can't fit on a poster, much less in Don Lemon's mouth. Because everything spins on Islam's wheels. It's easy to fall into the trap where we take the icons we're given, like gun-toting terrorists or burqa-clad ladies, and fight them on their own merits. We end up saying stuff like, you can't say that Muslims are terrorists because Islam is peaceful. I've personally gone on rants trying to explain to people, hold up, Muslims exist on a spectrum. Some are very conservative, and others are as secular as your best Christian friend who only goes to church once a year and, or never, but still calls themselves Christian. What's the diff, guys? We twist ourselves into knots, convincing people that Islam is peaceful and varied before we realise that, wait a second, you can be a Muslim while also recognising that Islam doesn't even explain half of your behaviours. Islam can be peaceful all it wants. It's not the only relevant detail about a group of people. Islam is a hot button word in the United States. But what if it doesn't explain anything about us? What if it doesn't explain terrorism at all? It's not for me to explain terrorism. There are plenty of smart people to do that, who are not comedians by trade. But I mention it because the need to shoehorn Islam is the major reason for everything in post 9/11 America, defines so much of how we see mainstream American Muslims. We've created an arsenal of icons based on this shoehorning, and those icons do not represent me or fit my worldview. Okay, so if you're like me, you might think there must be cultural touchstones from the mother country and to hold on to. Iranians certainly don't define themselves as Islamic terrorists. But there again, for the hyphenated types, your Iranian Americans, your Moroccan Irish Americans, the traditional icons for the mother country doesn't always work either. For example, Iranians love poetry. That's a nice stereotype, and there's truth to it because when in doubt, Iranians will bust out some totally insightful Rumi poem in Farsi. Somehow reciting poetry settles questions, quiets arguments. It's like eating mac and cheese. It makes Iranians feel all warm and mushy inside. But being a poetry nerd doesn't really speak to me. I don't really know of any Rumi's poems. No offence, I'm sure he was a nice guy. But I'm American, so this over it is alien to me. I'm more likely to recite Most Deaf. It's like if you're Russian American and maybe you don't want wooden dolls inside of slightly bigger wooden dolls, inside of slightly bigger wooden dolls. You take gin instead of vodka. You may prefer BLTs to borscht, and you kind of don't get Yakov Smirnoff. But at the same time, you might not understand why Americans go Dutch on bills, why they're so friendly to strangers, or why they take improv classes. Because you're not fully American either. You're this third thing. You're a Russian American. And you have to forge this third thing identity in the United States. And that's not easy. Like the hypothetical Russian American, I'm a third thing. Islam doesn't explain me. Iranian poetry doesn't explain me. And apple pie doesn't explain me. And yet I understand all of those things. Being a third thing is a designation for people who straddle worlds, who may have a foot in every door, yet their butt is hovering between door frames, and they may even have more than 2 feet. And either way, they're definitely going to pull a groin muscle. How do you know you're a third thing? For me, after the world got stuffed with Muslim iconography, I didn't recognise, but was lumped into, that was when I knew. You know because you've been squeezed into a category that might technically be true, but still doesn't fit right. You squirm in it. It's like having a rock in your shoe or wearing underwear that rides up your junk. Sure, they're technically underpants, but they don't fit right. Sure, I'm Muslim, but the way some people say it rides up my junk. You also know you're a third thing when you hang out with friends and you will totally dump on your own people, but get very mad when anyone else tries to join in on the dumping. I can say all I want about Iran, but you better be careful because I'm not going to let no one talk shit about Iran. But you were just saying how, no, zip it. You're a third thing when you can complain about the identity and you defend the identity in equal parts. If you're not a third thing, let me try and explain the feeling. Have you ever been at a summer camp that was overtly athletic? She says, having been at the summer camp that was overly athletic. You're supposed to be excited. You're supposed to have fun. Your parents drop you off at this day camp every morning and you're filled with dread. And then one day you find out that some of the kids are doing crafts off the field in a room with window screens to keep out the bugs. And you ask if you can join them and be part of that summer camp. There's paper mache and paint and puppets and it's heavenly. That's when you know you're the kind of person who likes summer camp writ large. But you're not the type of person who likes the sports part. Some might call you a nerd. If sports and arts and summer camp were nations, immigration stories and ethnicities, you'd be a third thing. Except that third things are kind of thirdy all their lives, and summer camp is only 6 weeks long. Even though my parents are full-on Iranians, I never learned their intricate customs. There's a far-reaching set of rules and a whole language of etiquette. It's so complicated. You could offer to buy someone a coffee and it could be interpreted as an insult depending on the other person's relative age, income, citizen status, gender, level of indigestion. I mean, it's nuts. My parents gave me some basic Iranian rules, but by no means all of them. Plus, I think they find it hilarious when they see me struggle. So when I meet Iranians, I can speak to them in Farsi, and I can say non-formal American-style greetings, but I'm always inadvertently breaking rules that I didn't even know existed. All of this happens because I'm that weird third thing, and I'm trying to forge my own way, but it's not easy. And when you're a third thing, you're addressing a heretofore non-existent third thing audience, or third thing sympathising audience. You're now the de facto voice of your people's third thing subgroup, and the people in the first and second things aren't necessarily going to like it. I feel like I've been trying to build a third thing sympathising audience since I was a kid. In the professional world of comedy, trying to forge this third thing identity has been a task, let me tell you. I once made a film for which my fellow comedian Dean Obidallah, and I rounded up a bunch of Muslim American comedians in a non-violent way, and we toured the country. We went to places like Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Arizona, places where they naturally love the Muzzies. We called the tour and subsequent film "The Muslims Are Coming," to which some meant preventative warning lecture on the coming Muslim apocalypse, and to others meant live Muslim fetish adult pornography. To most it meant stand-up comedy show featuring Muslims. Now I'm not going to lie, when we first set out to do these shows there was a lot of concern. Friends in New York thought that people in the Deep South were going to react badly. They thought that people would say mean things and maybe even do something physically violent. I definitely was not concerned about the violence because I thought, come on, I look like a cartoon character with the voice of Butters from South Park. How could anyone attack me? And yet we did plenty to elicit public attention. We would set up an Ask a Muslim booth in the middle of a town centre so people could ask us questions. We invited people to come bowl with a Muslim, an event that taught us that Muslims bowl very badly. This explains why Barack Obama bowled so badly. We handed out flyers at farmers' markets and gun shows, and we were generally visible. It was the visibility that had my friends and family concerned. Let's be honest, the South gets a pretty bad rap. They thought those Southerners were going to brutalise me, that they were going to unfurl large-scale Confederate flags and protest my shows, that they were going to show up chewing tobacco and demanding the immediate deportation of all Muslim comedians. Apologies once again. This time the memory card ran out. Again, with one paragraph to go. Basically, the South has a PR problem, not unlike that of Muslims, because the Southerners I met, not to mention the large number of Mormons I met in Utah and Idaho, were far from that. They were open, welcoming. They had honest questions about us. Questions like why we don't denounce terrorism, or would goldfish constitute halal food. I didn't find them particularly racist. I didn't think that they were trying to run me out of town, and I generally had a great time. I did see too much gun appreciation in the South, but nobody's perfect. So those are my two short stories from, well, essays really, from Don't Panic, I'm Islamic, which I shall put a link up for. In terms of, I suppose, an activity, for me I think it would be quite useful to talk about the third thing and about writing down maybe a little bit, maybe a paragraph or even a sentence about what that third thing is to you. What different worlds do you straddle? What different kinds of things, what different kinds of backgrounds are you made up of? And putting that down in either a sentence, a story, a paragraph, or even an image, and see where that kind of leads you in terms of making something. Thank you very much for listening. You can watch and listen to more stories in the 100 Stories Deep series, and you can subscribe to it using the link below. Thank you very much, and goodbye.